today's discussion. We will start with the seminar's reflections on the book as presented by Shammo.
Good evening to one and all present here. In examining the long and intricate history of India's freedom struggle, Bengal stands out as both a cultural nucleus and a catalyst and a site for profound political change. Yet, within this vast trajectory, the Young Bengal movement occupies a position akin to humanity's appearance on Carl Sagan's cosmic calendar. Brief, almost momentary, but nonetheless vivid. Under Henry Louis Vivian Derosio's influence, this small circle of followers left a sudden, striking imprint on the political life of 19th century Bengal and the creation of the modern liberal discourse in India. Scholars and upper caste Hindus of the time seem to hate these ideological militants, these radical, spoiled, wine-drinking, beef-eating Hindu college students who are so different from the pious pilgrims and reformists of the Brahmo Samaj or the gentlemen politicians of the National Congress. They were even branded as terrorists and anti-nationalists. This group, which would go on to be named the Young Bengals, is the subject of Dr. Rosinka Chaudhuri's latest book, India's First Radicals, Young Bengal and the British Empire, published this year from Viking by Penguin Random House India. Seeking to correct all the antagonizing notions and misconceptions surrounding this group, Professor Chaudhuri has subjected this influential group of iconoclasts to a much-deserved serious academic analysis which they had been deprived of all this time, and brought to light the massive paradigm shift brought about not just by Derosio himself but also his followers, individuals like Ramtonu Lahiri, Pyari Chand Mitro and Radhanath Shikdar, among many others who were inspired by the late prodigy's teachings while tracing their activities in 1843, a seminal year that serves as a pivotal point in her inquiry. The book itself has been divided into 6 chapters, each dealing with different activities of Young Bengal, from the creation of Bengal's first political society, the Society for Acquisition of General Knowledge, or SAGK that is, to their vehement struggle for the sake of establishing and maintaining the moving ideals of liberty, equality and fraternity. Arguably, the most important feature of the book that can be seen throughout all of these chapters is Professor Chaudhuri's laudable research aimed at dispelling the various misconceptions around and accusations made against the Young Bengals. As mentioned before, due to Derosio's own presence and their keen interest in Western literature, politics and philosophy, it is a very common belief that this group of radicals consisted of members of the richer, more westernized sections of 1840s Bengal. However, an account by the Derosian and renowned mathematician Radhanath Shikdar, quoted by Chaudhuri in the very introduction of this book, dispels this idea. কলেজে এক মনে পড়িতে পারিতাম না, একবার পড়ার কথা মনে পড়িত, পরক্ষণে বাটিতে ফিরিয়া যাইয়া কি খাইব, মা বুঝি এখনো কিছু খান নাই, এই সকল ভাবনা মনে উদিত হইয়া পড়ার ব্যাঘাত ঘটিত. Shikdar's poverty during his Hindu college days made even food being on the table back at home uncertain. This would explain why he would be so attracted to Derosio's radical ideas, which, as Chaudhuri goes on to show, advocated for equality, inclusivity, the eradication of social and gender discrimination, and a democratic right to freedom of speech, and championed for the rights of the peasants and the underclass. Unsurprisingly, these ideals are seen verbatim in the 1843 resolution of the SAGK, which also pledged to admit all persons anxious to promote the good of India, without respect to caste, creed, place of birth, or rank in society. Suddenly, the Young Bengal stopped coming across as a cohort of probably anti-nationalist disruptors, and instead as a group genuinely interested in the welfare of their fellow citizens. They went against every traditional convention established by the upper caste Hindu elite at the time, even arguing and fighting for women's rights. This was a striking departure from the dominant mainstream socio-cultural discourse of the time, which had begun to prioritize traditionalism in response to Britain's claim of India not having a history or culture of its own. This was not taken kindly to, and the Young Bengals were heavily lambasted in that time. Yet, their activities would go on to lay the very foundation of modern ideas of democracy and liberal left-wing politics. In words of Chaudhuri herself, in 1843, a remarkable constellation of events contributed to the shape of the Indian modern, as a series of episodes played out across the spaces of the city and beyond. From the Sanskrit College Hall to the Faujdari Balakhana to the hills of Dehradun, around issues of caste, gender discrimination, equality under law, freedom of speech, and the formation of the first Indian political party, the Bengal British India Society. If we focus on this single year in the life of this putative nation, 1843, it is possible to show, by ranging across an entire spectrum of dissent and assertion of rights, how a way of thinking about the nation and its people was being brought into existence. A lingering question that the book poses is whether the young Bengals were successful, or if the short stint was a failure in the grand scheme of things. With what is stated in the book, however, it is undeniable that the young Bengals left a massive impact in the history of India's anti-colonial struggle, with their ideas resoundingly true even to this day, if not more. Looking back at Sagan's calendar, humanity might have been only present in the last 4 minutes of the year, but these minutes saw shifting civilizations, space explorations, and vehement struggles, just like the struggle of the young Bengals, short-lived yet irreplaceable. All this being said, a few questions do come to mind. Firstly, one has to wonder about the complete absence of women in the struggle. Sure, individuals like Rani Rashmuni are mentioned, yet one cannot help but think if there were any other short-lived movements where women went against the grain of traditionalism, only to be stomped out and buried in time. Also, with De Rosio himself being of mostly Portuguese British origin, what relations or opinions did other non-official Europeans or East Indians have about the young Bengal radicals during their phase of activism? It is sincerely hoped that more light on these aspects will be shed in today's roundtable that we are eagerly looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Shammo. Now we move on to the roundtable. Our first discussant is Professor Sumit Chakrabarti. Thank you.
Right, so good afternoon everyone, and thank you English Seminar for organizing this very interesting and important roundtable today. Also, Shammo, thank you for a brief overview of your opinions on the book and the last two questions that you've asked. Important questions, but they have also been addressed in the book, even though briefly. Now, why I am the first speaker today is because of a very complex politics. First of all, I asked to be the first speaker because I belong to the English department, and this is a seminar organized by the English department, so rightfully this is my place. Secondly, if you notice how the English department is completely sidelined in this round table. There is this historian, there is this another historian posing as a sociologist, and Rosinka, although she has been in the social sciences for dog's years now, and she's the director of the Center for Studies in Social Sciences. Right? So we are completely yeah, like. So, yeah. So, anyway, on a serious note, what I wanted to say in my brief foray into this roundtable is that probably many people in the audience have not read the book. I have recently reviewed the book for a daily. It's not yet published, but so I thought that it is maybe before we start talking about difficult things, let us know what the book is all about. First, it's interesting that the book, when I first received the book, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that it was published by Penguin. Thing is, we recently had the very famous Will Dalrymple debate about who is doing history and how to do history, and what have serious historians contributed to to the field of history, and how the common mass of people have not been taught history the way they should have been. So, one important question is how to write history. Whose history are we writing? And for whom does one write history? So, Penguin Publishing, this popular publisher publishing, both Rosinka and Sudipta have been published by Penguin. Although Sudipta's book first came out from Yale, I think, and then because it was so popular, it was taken up by Penguin. So the thing is, I was immediately reminded of Ira Mukherjee's Upal, Audrey Truschke, Will Dalrymple, his son now, Sam Dalrymple, Diana Eck, fascinating book on Benares published by Penguin. So this is one important aspect that we also need to address, is that we are doing serious history now, and it is being published from popular presses. And something as important as this is, as I say this consciously, that the young Bengal has been a neglected part of 19th century history, early modern Bengal history, and it has generally been relegated to the footnotes of history. It was important that a monograph was written on the young Bengal, and that Rosinka has done it now, and it has been published not by a university press or other academic commercial presses, but by Penguin. Is an important step forward, I think, because I, as a student of literature, I don't always understand the very difficult history books that come out from. So it is important that they speak to us in ways that the common man can learn from it as well. The other thing is that Chaudhuri is clearly standing apart from the major strands of writing South Asian history. As she says in the introduction itself, orality, subaltern history, nationalism and caste. And let me put it this way, she's standing in opposition to them rather than in opposition to them. She's saying that I'm not doing their kind of history now. At this moment, here, I'm doing history which is not following the trajectories that have been followed all this while across departments, South Asian history writing departments, history departments. She's not rejecting the contents of these histories, but taking an oppositional stance, standing apart in many senses from the likes of Partha Chatterjee or Dipesh Chakrabarti. The idea of provincializing Europe is something that she counters in this book in a certain sense. Also, it is interesting it's also refreshing how Rosinka begins the book with a quote from the essay by Virginia Woolf. It's a literary reference. You see Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, on or about December 1910, human character changed. And she takes a cue from there and says, on or about April 1831, in Calcutta, human character changed. The book itself is anecdotal in parts and tells many stories as part of a retelling of the history of the city of Calcutta in the 1830s and the 1840s. It's a very refreshing look at the way one can read and do history without locating oneself within the more common, popular strands of writing history, like orality, like nationalism, like caste, etc. The book is an attempt to recalibrate the way we have learned to do history of 19th century Bengal, both in terms of method and content. Ram Mohan, Vidyasagar, Bankim, the three doins of the three Mahapurush figures, and I'm borrowing this from Bhudev Mukhopadhyay, the three Mahapurush figures, they have been a central concern of most of history writing about people, about personalities, and this is what Rosinka is moving away from, in a certain sense, from this central way of thinking about history in 19th century. Also, the agrarian or the nationalist trajectories that have established firm ideological templates. You see, throughout the book, she is talking about the agrarian. She's talking about the nationalist, but she's not borrowing the trajectories from the erstwhile historians who've taught us how to think about writing histories of 19th century Bengal. Either personalities or these larger templates of writing about history. Rosinka also begins with the important question, who are the young Bengal? And claims them as a separate category, as in a category of historical thinking, in terms of thinking about the history of 19th century early modern Bengal. Although students of the Hindu college, they were, as Shammo just pointed out, they were all, more or less all, except a couple of them, they were all indigent, they were all poor, they came from not so well-to-do families, and they wanted to do, and what they wanted to do in the larger scheme of things was also a question of agency that cannot be explained away by merely their apocryphal deeds, Gurur Mangsho Khawa, Mad Khawa, their association with their East Indian teacher, or the Hindu college. So they became personalities on their own, of their own right, and they were doing things that etched important markers of thinking in the mind of the Bhadralok Bengali. Once again, Rosinka is very careful about talking about how she means them to be Bhadralok, poor but Bhadro, and not the kind of Bhadraloks that Bhavani Charan was describing in Kolkata Kavalala. So it is she's standing apart from all the general trajectories of doing history, South Asian history, but also not opposing any one of them, but taking them along. The young Bengal was also confronting the strands of conservatism, the Baptists from Srirampur, the Brahmos, and Alexander Duff. The cultural amnesia, or relegating the young Bengal to the footnotes of history, has been an inevitability that Rosinka is rescuing them in this. She's rescuing them from in this important book. The fact that one can think about the modern, about modernity in Bengal with the key that young Bengal provides us, and not any of the Mahapurush figures, but apart from them, the young Bengal, other than that, the young Bengal, notwithstanding them, the young Bengal. There's this continuous emphasis on these figures. You see, throughout the book, she brings up newspapers and pamphlets and reports, and she's close reading them in a very archival way, and talking about how each one of them had its own separate, special, important impact on the larger scheme of things, although in the traditional history writing they have not been addressed adequately. And so which is why this book is so important for us to read. The book also attempts a revisiting of the idea of the modern in the context of colonial India. 1843 as a landmark moment, the establishment of the political party, the Bengal British India Society, back to back with the establishment of the Society for the Acquisition of General Knowledge in 1828. Rosinka sees this as a moment of the foundation of modern India with the emphasis on two major ideological strands, secularism and bilingualism. That is, কি হয়েছে? কি করবে? আজকাল এগুলো খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট, বোঝো না? কোথায় গেল? লাইক করে নিয়ে যাও। হ্যাঁ, করো করো। না, এখন আবার পাখিটা কি? ও আমাদেরকে ডাইনোসর বলছে।
Just 1 second, প্রেজেন্টেশনটা ডিসকানেক্ট হয়ে গেছিল।
So, through secularism, an emphasis on civil society discourse formation, that the civil society is emerging through this idea of secularism, that is one of the important narratives that the young Bengal are provoking in the middle class Bhadralok in a certain sense. Also the educated professional rather than the ones defined, as I said, by Bhavani Charan. This was the defining moment when the local was spreading its tentacles towards the global. Rosinka rescues this narrative from the reading of micro-histories, comparisons, for example, between the Sangbad Prabhakar and the Bengal Spectator, or close reading from the Gyanan Nation. It is an important attempt to dismantle the stereotypes surrounding the young Bengal and underscore their native valency. Within the native valency, mind you, the young Bengal are not Sahibs. They are not people who are imitating the Sahibs. They are indigenous native people. So, to underscore their native valency within the larger framework of writing the history of early modern Bengal. So, this is more or less the plan of the book in a way. But I would let Rosinka speak about the book for a while. This is how it is, and then then Upal, and then Sudipta finally says something. And then we can move on to the discussion.
I don't actually get to say anything at all. I was not under the impression that I'm going to say anything at all. Since I've taken the trouble to write the book, all you need to do is read it. I was not listed as a discussant, I don't think. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank all of you. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to the English seminar for organizing this, for inviting me here, for taking the trouble to think about the book, if not read it. I'm not sure how many of you will read it until you have your illegal PDFs or whatever it is that you read from nowadays. I know that at least all our students at the center certainly have stopped buying books a long time ago. Why buy them when you can download them for free? So yes, until you can do that, I suppose you will not read it or you have not read it yet, but you will have a basic idea. Of course, you're surrounded by, we saw as we came into the building, Derosio building, and I said to my companion that if he knew, what a building he was going to become, if only he knew. But actors in history very rarely know that they are actors in history. It was a very, very interesting moment for me to excavate. It was also, I like the word appositional. Thank you, Sumit, because I do want to stress this, that it's not oppositional to any of the historians countered, argued with, debated in the book itself. All of them, I have the greatest respect for their friends and interlocutors. If I have taken issue with I can't even remember who I've taken issue with, almost everybody. But say, for instance, if I've taken issue with Partha Chatterjee or Dipesh Chakrabarti, anywhere, even in a single sentence, these are my greatest these are the people I admire the most. These are the people who are my greatest allies, friends, I was going to say, but they're too senior to be called that, maybe. Although I will count them as really their intellectual companionship, especially because I've been at the center my entire career, so I have worked there and I've had the privilege of coming into contact with almost everybody. I've even taken Gautamda to task. I haven't met him yet after the book was published because of his depiction of Dakhina Ranjan's elopement with the Rani of Bardhaman, where he relied too heavily, I thought, on a single source. But all of this, as is in the tradition of the centre, really, as any of you who know the centre may know, or if you know of its past history, that argumentation, debate and difference does not mean disrespect or falling out at all. However much you might shout or however much you might take issue with anything, that is not a mark of anything other than an agreement, really, about the variety of intellectual thinking. The thought processes should not be unilinear or one-dimensional in any way. So, thank you for inviting me here. I'm really not going to summarize it. Sumit had already said something. I'm sure the other two also distinguished speakers that you have, I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing them much more than me. I'll answer questions if you have any for me, particularly with regard to what I've written. But I'm not going to summarize it or say any more about it. So, again, thank you for having me here.
Okay, thank you. Upal and I, we had a very brief discussion last evening when he said he has a lot to say about the book. So, Upal.
Of course, there's a lot to say about the book because Rosinka Di, I was fortunate enough to have Rosinka Di as part of this other book that we have been doing on the history of the college. And in the course of the preparation for that book, I came to know about this book, and we had maybe some conversations on it at that time as well. Now I have read the book, and I'm very happy and excited to share my thoughts. Thank you, Rosinka Di, for the book, first of all, of course. And thank you, English Seminar, for organizing this, because nothing can be more appropriate than discussing this book in this institution. So, for many in this room, maybe the significance of this comment is not yet understood, because they are young people into Presidency University and not Presidency College. So, I don't know if what I'm saying has been able to make its point. But maybe if we could actually have this discussion in the Sanskrit College Hall, that would have been the ideal case of reenacting what the book has been doing. So I'm saying this because the time when Young Bengal was alive and coming out of Hindu College was basically a building, remains of which can be still found behind the Sanskrit College. That was the first building of Hindu College. And this main building was built much later in the 1870s. By that time, Young Bengal had become the stuff of, as she points out in the epilogue, a lot of empty signification. Anyway, but so that's great actually to have this discussion here in this institution. And also it's appropriate that English Seminar has organized this discussion, because once again, as part of the history of this institution, we have realized from our archive that the seminars in Presidency was sort of a 20th century, I would say, reinvention of the kind of pedagogic tradition out of which the Young Bengal movement grew in the earliest days of the institution. And English Seminar, along with philosophy, history, economics, physics, etc., were the earliest of the examples of the institutionalization of the seminar method of pedagogy, which the college authorities at that time directly adopted from the Humboldtian idea of the university. But that's a different story. Nevertheless, what Young Bengal had been doing at that time, I think, trickled down in different forms in these seminars. This whole, act of critical questioning, critical thinking, out of a very close relationship with one's mentor, because that's what the seminars were supposed to do, establish such relationships of mentoring. So in that sense, this context is very appropriate for having a discussion on this book. That's the first point I wanted to make. Of course, Rosinka's writings I have read many before, and like others, this one is also very lucid, with all its analytical points, all its intricacies in place. So I have really enjoyed reading that. First of all, that's something I wanted to suggest as well. The second point, which is what I found very interesting in this story of the Young Bengal, which I don't know if Rosinka will agree with, but there are many clues scattered in the book for such a reading, which is that there is a hidden institutional history of patricide in this book. And that story is one of the Hindu college producing Young Bengal, and then much later in the 20th century, the Marxist historian of lore, Sushobhan Sarkar, in the Presidency College, bringing back the story of Young Bengal in the form of his famous work, Notes on the Bengal Renaissance, which then becomes the object of a much celebrated and long sustained critical engagement, where the idea of the Renaissance will be debunked by Sarkar's own students. Most importantly, Borunde, Ashok Sen. Sumit Sarkar was not here directly, but he was part of this group. And then also in a very different direction, where although he was not Sarkar's own students, but Rajat Rai himself as well, because Rajat Rai wrote this very important volume on Ram Mohan, which he co-edited with V.C. Joshi, which was also generally in the mood of the kind of critique that the Young Bengal was put to by Ashok Sen, Borunde and others. So there is this very interesting history of the college producing that moment, and then the college subsequently producing another moment where that original moment could be undone from within. So there is a sort of institutional patricide there, and where I see this story extending is to the subaltern studies group, which is also a further development of the same moment, and also at a time when the college is experiencing the Naxalite movement, where also in terms of political action, the whole legacy of Young Bengal is being very seriously questioned. And subsequently, the subaltern studies collective is somewhat merging with the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, where Rosinka is the director now, and she is returning the Young Bengal to what she thinks is its rightful place. So I see a very interesting hidden history of institutional ecology and patricide here in Calcutta, out of which this story, through which this story can be read. This, I don't know whether students here are aware of this, but this is actually a connected story of many institutions and many ideas. So I fully agree with Rosinka's rightful revision of the kind of dismissive histories which we got in the first round of Young Bengal's assessment. And I also find this suggestion very potent, that the Young Bengal should be read as a kind of political thought. A political thought which is different either from the tradition of doing political thought in terms of great men, canonical figures, Western initially, but in the wake of more decolonizing histories, nowadays Indian as well. But even then, even in that move, I do see that when we write, when we try to kind of reinstitute there is this definitely a political gesture of trying to reinstitute figures like, let's say, Gandhi, Ambedkar, Tilak as part of a global canon of political thought. But even in that move, the classic intellectual history approach towards doing intellectual history out of big figures stays. And what Rosinka is doing in this book, she is talking about a group, a collective, none of the individuals of which really had that kind of canonical status. And the group was far more intersubjective at some level. There was no specific individual, or let's say one or two individuals who were necessarily the leaders of the group, whereas the rest of them were followers. So it was more of a well-distributed collective in that sense. That body being considered as an agent of political thought. This move, I think, is interesting, and because it again places this group as somewhat of an agent which is different from the canonical big political thought people of either European or Indian heritage. Neither does it say that political thought now needs to be done via subaltern actors in order to question the earlier trend of doing political thought through big canonical figures. Another very interesting move, which let's say somebody like Robert Travers has done in his recent work, where he has looked at ordinary petitioning as possible instances of political thinking, as reading political theory and thought out of such petitions. But Young Bengal somewhere lies in between these two positions, and this move I thought was important and interesting. Another point that Rosinka makes, which is important to also revise the earlier assessments of Young Bengal, is the bilinguality of Young Bengal. This has been typically ignored by presenting Young Bengal as straightforward, English-speaking, anglicized, westernized people. On the contrary, the point that Rosinka makes, and I agree with it, that a lot of what we call modern Bangla, in that sense, comes out of this moment. So, the bilinguality of Young Bengal stays within its specifically modern character. So, by talking about Young Bengal's use of Bangla, she is not trying to claim a sort of vernacular status for Young Bengal, an authentic vernacular status. She is suggesting that they too were instrumental in producing a modern Bangla. But she's also pointing out that they were not only speaking in English. They were not only writing in English, contrary to the earliest presentations of them as essentially anglicized people. So this, I think, and the point that she makes, that this was possible because the early 19th century movement was also a scene in Calcutta which was more cosmopolitan than later moments of colonialism, and that allowed a kind of sociality which was part of Young Bengal's bilingualism. Okay, so that is an important point. She has rightfully pointed out that that Young Bengal figures were not landowning wealthy people. That point has been made by Sumit as well, and it's again an important corrective, using the word elite flatteningly in earlier histories had this problem of not really making that kind of effort to stock take the specific social background of the so-called elites of this period, of this movement. Something that Maguire did in his listing of the background of the Bhadraloks. But that's the only work that you see actually quantitatively pointing out who these Bhadraloks were in terms of their property relations, in terms of their caste relations. Otherwise, most historians have used Maguire as a foil to generalize on the so-called eliteness of this group, which I think therefore is a very important corrective that she posits. Another point is the remarkable archival work. Now I say this because the stuff related to this period was last explored by people like Gautam Chakrabarti, who compiled a lot of valuable materials from the public libraries and other places. This is a pre-digitization era. The sense of archive is very different. After that, because the critique happened and Young Bengal was swept aside, and the early 19th century period was therefore also squarely summarized and, moved ahead of, there was no concerted attempt to recover a lot of precious materials, because that period is also veritably periodical and Shobha revolution period. So many periodicals and so many Shobhas are coming up, and they are having their proceedings written down, etc. So there's a lot of material, but then historians don't really make that effort to recover that material post-70s. And now I do see that Rosinka has been helped by a lot of digitization. For example, something like Arya Darshan and Radhanath's essays on Radhanath in Arya Darshan can now be accessed because of the extensive digitization work that has been done via Heidelberg. But even then, to find out the material which is there and also to complement that with the kind of work she has done in other libraries is to put on the plate back again a lot of important material which had not been adequately explored because they had been passed over through a certain moment of critique. That, I think, gives a lot of resource for subsequent generations of historians to now take a relook at this work. So this is pretty much what I really enjoyed the book, and these are the observations that I had about the kind of analytical work that the book is doing, so valuable, and I also would say that it's very courageous to say Young Bengal is very radical in times when writing about Bengali Bhadralok would inevitably lead to academic censure in all professional circles. All of us know that this is the sort of deeply held yet open inner secret of the academia. So it's actually quite courageous to do that. And I'm fully with that kind of gesture. Because it's about critical but rightful assessment. And I support that. I have a disagreement with one major point of the book, and which obviously Rosinka herself and others are free to question, but I would put that on the table for further discussion. Which is that despite Rosinka's very careful, considered argumentation, I would still not want to call Young Bengal left. And this is where kind of my stakes are. So, and what I'm going to say has been anticipated in the book, that they are utilitarians, to put it very, very glibly. Okay. And I would try to, and she has made this point that this might be the framing, but I would still not to accept that and go beyond and call them more than something, more than Benthamite or utilitarian, but I would still want to retain that idea and say that, people who are forming alliances with anti-corn law and abolitionists, anti-corn law league and abolitionists are clearly people who are sort of upholding the virtues of a capitalism that utilitarian ideals would put in place in the colony. The idea of the people, which Rosinka claims to be a radical idea, which and the use of the word radical is sort of interchangeably used in the book with left and socialist, which is what I have a problem with. I would have kind of agreed with the point about Young Bengal being radical, had it not been also called left or socialist, meaning radical being that. So there I would say that, for example, if you think about the riot, now the riot as this oppressive figure who has been buried under the mistakes of permanent settlement is a figure about which all these apparently opposed positions are talking about. So just as you say that the Young Bengal is advocating for the riot and for its oppressive condition, I would say that the colonial government, and this is there in Ranjit Go itself, and also in my own work, because I've followed that trail extensively, that almost a decade after permanent settlement is done, in Bengal, colonial government starts criticizing it and says that, it has not been, this is not a right policy. Because permanent settlement made all kinds of mistakes, it buried the riot, and, we have trampled over their rights. There's a lot of criticism within Bengal. And if I go beyond Bengal, the fact that permanent settlement and zamindari settlement does not happen either in southern India or western India or in the northwestern provinces or in Punjab is because in all these geographical regions, the riot is being championed. Munro is championing the riot, Metcalfe is championing the riot, Malcolm is championing the riot. Subsequently in Punjab, Punjab governors are also championing the riot. On the other hand, you see Ram Mohan is also championing the riot. So between Ram Mohan, the colonial government, Young Bengal, we see advocates of riots all over the place. Now, what is this figure of the peasant that all these advocates are talking about? Are they all socialists? Are they all radical left people? My question is that what if we pursue Eric Stokes' argument, simply speaking, that this riot that they were talking about is the substantial peasantry. This riot is the agent of agrarian capitalism. This riot is Ratnalekha Ray's Jodha, who actually took over the reins of the Bengal countryside even before the permanent settlement. So, my point is that in that case, if I make this argument, right, that why do we need to call this argument socialist? Why can't we call this argument plainly utilitarian? And if I then, let's say, if I then create two kinds of framework, one of, let's say, European Marxist thinking of this period, to which you have ventured, but you have used Sumit Sarkar's point that, Sumit Sarkar said that they were not up to that standard, that's why they can't be said socialist, but you don't agree with this. But if I use that framework, that might be, unfair or incorrect or anachronistic. But if I don't even use that framework, I was thinking of Marx's argument about the peasantry in 18th Brumaire, which is a text written in 1848. And if you see the way Marx talks about peasantry, you would see that there is a clear understanding of class and the category of labor, which comes out of the utilitarians, but is given a totally different turn by Marx in this period. And that's where I would call socialism is coming from, which the Young Bengal people are not talking about. On the other side, if I use the framework of the Indian left and see how the official Indian left has been talking about the peasant. If you think about the Indian left has not been talking about the peasant as a riot. The Indian left from the beginning has clear categorizations of the Borgadar and the Krishi Sromik as the peasant. So, if I use the vocabulary of the Indian left as a frame to measure your claim of Young Bengal being radical left, or if I use the other framework of, let's say, Euro-Marxism, of labor being the hinge on which the category of the socialist people would stand, none of them are to be found in Young Bengal's advocacy. So, therefore, this is the point of contention that I would bring to the table. Of course, Rosinka, you would not mind my making this criticism and opening this conversation, because we have had this in 2 rounds for our presidency book, and so she knows. But really, thank you so much, because I've learned a lot from the book. I've asked my students, in fact, to take a close stock of all the materials that you have used, so that they can be recovered to build a very robust archive for a lot of important history to be done. And generally speaking, also the point about reading Young Bengal as political thought has really persuaded me, and that analytical move I really appreciated. Thank you so much.
Because he had some specific questions. Yes. I'd like to, I mean, if this was during our volume, we would just immediately sort of talk to us. So this is a form of just talking to each other. So before I forget the various points that Upal made, just to clarify, to see whether this makes any sense in response. Before I go to the question of the riot, quickly to say, since you've been speaking about the archival material that I used and the fact that Heidelberg has digitized some of it, certainly the Arya Darshan is available online. Most of the other material, unfortunately, which is why it took 10 years to actually put this book together, is in the British Library. The National Library files of the Bengal Hurkari, for instance, are so blackened that I couldn't read them, the ones that I tried to read at least. It is microfilm reels, actually. These are not digitized. So it's really been hours and hours at the microfilm readers at the British Library, not in the India office upstairs, but in the rare books, because that's open till 8 o'clock. But it has been all done. So anybody wanting to follow up on this, unfortunately, will face the obstacle, which some of my students do, because if they, I have a student, for instance, working on, she wanted to work on Derozio, but I encouraged her to work on the East Indians. Again, very, very, very little work done on this community in this period, in the early 19th century. But I've asked her to apply for a Charles Wallace, because it is actually very difficult to retrieve any of the newspaper, journal, periodical, which, as you mentioned, there's a plethora. I mean, there's a whole lot of it. But it's all there, only in the British Library, not available here, which also might be partly the reason why that the work was not done. Gautam Chakrabarti went to the British Library and brought back, very interestingly, and this I found at the Bhavani Sen Gronthagar in the near the Joda Gidja, this Bhavani Sen Gronthagar. There was a box, orange-colored box with AGFA written on top. It was a cardboard box with AGFA written on top, orange color with the black AGFA mark, which had the relevant, not the entire, don't think all of it, but huge sections from the Kaleidoscope, which was a journal published, as you know, by Derozio in that time. This I took as much of it as I could for my. And this is even before we had smartphones, so it was literally Xeroxed. This was when I was doing my Derozio book, when I did the Derozio edition. So Gautam Chakrabarti, literally, you're right, completely different era of archival work. He actually just brought back Dista mane photocopy kore bodhoy uni এনেছিলেন. That AGFA box has now disappeared. I have now gone back to search for it. I've sent people to search for it. It's untraceable, apparently. But anyway, it's there at the British Library. And he obviously brought it from the British Library. So this is not easily done over here. So I have had to scrounge, apply for fellowships, apply for things, go there, spend time, stay in my sister's house. Take the train, what we all do when we try and extend our stay when we go to the UK for work or whatever. So that is the way that, so just to make that clarification that it is very difficult to access material, and it's mostly on microfilm, it's not actually digitized yet, most of the material used here. Now, the important question about the Indian left. Clarification number 1. It is actually, as you know, of course, because you've just read the book, it is actually, I begin actually with Sumanta Banerjee, this wonderful book that he's published, I think, 2 years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago. What is it called? Young Bengal theke Communist Bengal. So he's tracing a trajectory there, right? From that 1830s moment to the left. I have quoted these people. I've quoted Shumanta Banerjee, and the other, of course, very important historian who says this very emphatically is Chris Bailey. Chris Bailey is the one who's saying that this is the nucleus of the Indian left. So this identification of them as the seedbed, if you like, of a certain leftist mode of thinking is via quotation. If you go back and you read it very carefully, you'll see that I'm not making the claim myself. I'm not saying they are left. You can't make that claim. It would be anachronistic to make that claim.
Narahari Kobiraj also you have partially used.
Yes, I have partially used Narahari Kobiraj. His introduction to Arsidat's Peasantry of Bengal, I've used that, yes. So definitely I'm being very careful. You have to, for me, it's like minefields. I have to literally walk around minefields, because also remember that each and every chapter of this book has been presented at the center at staff seminars. I'm more scared of center staff seminars than I am of anywhere else in the world. So I would have anticipated then the question that you're putting to me. And this, I tried. Originally I had used the word socialist. Is there a socialist thinking before socialism? I had asked. And I was fried alive in very hot oil. So then strategically I decided I will not use the word socialist. I cannot. It's anachronistic to use the word socialist. I have not used the word socialist for them. I have not used the word left for them. The left part is coming because other commentators have identified as the fountainhead of what they identify as a very honorable tradition, I think, of leftist thought in Bengal. About the riot. Once again, I've quoted Ratnalekha Rai. I have gone to her book, which in fact, if I make a very bold confession, although I am one of his greatest admirers, I think she actually does a wonderful job compared to Ranajit Guha. Her analysis in her book I found more useful for my understanding of agrarian relations in Bengal than rule of property. Rule of property, I was slightly alarmed to discover after I read it very late in my life, because I am coming to all this not like you all, born and bred here and, spawned here in the nucleus of presidency and Calcutta politics. I am an outsider. I did not come to this, I was schooled here, but I did not come back to the city. After giving my Madhyamik, I came back only when I was applying for the job at the center. A few years before that, I got married and came back here because my parents were here, my family is here. But I'm not part of that, mahol that all of you are part of. For me, it was all a discovery, and it was all a lot of reading and studying. So Ratnalekha Rai actually was deeply grateful for that book and admired very much. As you know, she has made this point herself in the book. That the riot is the cultivator and often owned large parcels of land. So there's no question that the riot is the peasant. And I've made it clear in the book itself. I've said there's no question that the riot is equivalent to the peasant. But the reason that I'm continuing with the use of riot is because Pyari Chand Mitra used it. And that chapter, if you remember, the second half is entirely devoted to Pyari Chand's two essays. And he gives very vivid, this is also of interest to me as a literary scholar, that they're all actually using language and the power of portrayal through what they write and wherever they're writing it for very powerfully. So Pyari Chand, in fact, gives a very vivid description of this very poor riot, as he calls him, who is being thrown out of his house by the daroga. He describes the dheki, boti, madur, everything that is being pulled out of that hut and thrown out, and the riot is bewildered. Why is this happening to him? He cannot understand it. I couldn't understand it. I made sense of it by reading through Ratnalekha Rai and all the other. I began with Niladri Bhattacharya's book and read all of that and came to an understanding of that. Ranajit Guha, I discovered when I read Rule of Property, is not centered on the Indian peasant at all. He's more concerned with Philip Francis than with, I thought. So he's really talking about the idea of the permanent settlement, right? So he's more concerned with European thought than he is with actually on the ground what is happening over here. I put this question to many historians. I put it to Sudipta himself. I put it to Pathoda, Gautam, anybody I could find, why in 1842, before George Thompson comes, he comes in 1843, why is P.R. Chand Mitra suddenly writing about the riot? What is it? I couldn't understand because I'm not a student of history. I couldn't understand historics. Other historians will know. All of them gave me a background more or less, but nothing concrete. I couldn't find that concreteness to why at that moment until I think Ratnalekha Rai or somewhere, certainly in all the literature I read, when I realized, okay, it's the resumption of Land Regulations Act 1839, exactly, the law, which then becomes a law, which is enabling the magistrate via the police to haul this poor peasant out of his hut and dispossess him of his land, and which he had traditionally held from the time of Akbar. This I was a journey of discovery to me. So no, I'm certainly very careful to say that the riot is not the peasant, and I'm also, when I say left, I'm quoting much better known and much more venerated historians than myself. So I thought it would be better to sort of, talk about it with you before Sudipta, because then Sudipta will make a lot of points and I may have to answer those as well. Thank you.
Now my task has been made easier because there's not much time left. We need more discussion, so I would have the privilege of being brief. Now I was invited to this conversation rather at the last moment, so.
No, I just.
No, it's okay. I'm not complaining. I'm
dragged you in to punctuate the two Chakrabartis.
As I joked, I cannot be a Chakrabarti, but I can be Nikotvarti, which I am. So what I will present to you is really, literally I was up late at night, sort of quickly reading the book. I'm sure I did not do entire justice to it, but I will give you some first impressions. And what I'm going to talk about is from a completely different angle, which is also in the title of the book, which has to do with the word empire. Not so much colonial or colonialism, but empire itself. And so I'll start with three quick images that came to my mind while I was reading the book. One is, of course, E.P. Thompson's very famous line, "The enormous condescension of history," which is actually written about the English working class. But there's a condescension here that has emerged, which is unfortunate, which is to say lump everything together under the idea of the formation of one class, or one kind of elitism, right? A monoculture of Bengali exceptionalism. And that has to be dispelled. And I think that Rosinka has done a very good job of actually parsing through that and saying, no, there are moments that need to be brought back into the historical consciousness, which is a very important, and I thank you for that. And what I mean by that, in the second point, and this is another image that comes to my mind, which is a line that apparently Kipling's mother put to Kipling many, many decades later, which is now part of a famous poem. "What should they know of England, of whom only England know?" And in fact, if you think about it, at the time that we are talking about, from the 1820s to the mid-1840s, what is England even? And what is the British Empire even? And what is indeed what we later call India? So that comes to mind, and this fraught intimacy that you see between the projected subjects of the British Empire, right? Who not only simply sort of pay taxes or rent, but have anything to say or to participate in a position of being governed, being ruled, and that point is very important. And the last image, of course, is from Marx himself, where Marx uses the word radical, defines radical in many places, but the idea of radical here, I think that we might want to really separate that from the word left. or even the word social or socialist. Root. To be radical is to grasp something by the root, as in radicals that we eat, that is rooted in the ground. So rooting and uprooting something, recognizing something for the first time, or at least in a powerful sense, is really the essence of it. And that, in that sense, the radicalism of the young Bengal, which Rosinka has rightly compared to the radicalism of the young Irish and the radicalism of the young Italians. Back then, the young Turks were twinkled in political imagination's eyes. But anyhow, so those images, drive me towards the first thought, which is the idea of this entity that we're talking about, which is British India. Now, imagine the map of India at this time, and in fact, I really love the fact that how Radhanath Shigda is a protagonist of this story, because he is part of between Lambton and Everest, right? Lambton with the great chain of triangles, and Everest really the first real atlases of India, not Bengal, not Hindustan, which is Renal in the 1790s. This is 1820s. The first atlas of India is being created. But what does that atlas look like? It is not India. It is various British dependencies and unconquered parts. There's no Punjab. The Marathas have barely fallen, right? Their treaties are being actively pursued. Dalhousie is not quite on the scene. So this is it is not a conquest, it's a conquering state. Still, its political lines, its edges are not known, right? So really what I think, Rosinka, you've done in this book, in some ways to me, significantly, and maybe it's not articulated that way in that sense, is that you have actually taken the story out of the teleology of the nation. Right? It's really not the nation state here so much as although there's the idea of Bangala or Bengal or the British Empire. The story is really about the political field in which there's an articulation of the possibility of sovereign political thinking. What is the responsibility, the duty, and the legacy of a British subject? Remember, Macaulay's idea of the brown thinking Englishman is still quite not there, right? It's not quite there yet in articulated in the way we have been taught. So this arena of engagement is absolutely crucial. And the word that, again, I think Rosinka has brought into focus here, and that word bhadra, not necessarily in the elite sense, that's one definition obviously, but also bhadra, shil, shishto, that those words actually approximate with another idea that we're all familiar with, the idea of civic, civitatis, a civic engagement, a town, right? Cosmopolitan. Calcutta is a town, and there are townspeople, and then it's a center of an expanding empire. So this is really, in some ways, a moment in imperial world history. And echoing Tapan Rai Chaudhuri's idea that this is one of the earliest non-English, westernized, sort of groups of people outside of the older Anglophonic world. So if that is the case, then I think that it opens up new possibilities of looking back, going over this, what looks like has been much trodden but actually not. Then the past becomes really a different kind of a country again. And I think that hopefully the book will open up those questions again. And then lastly, I want to think about the question of identity. Not in the current sort of fashionable sense of self, but the identification of a subject itself, right, as a political subject. And here, there is a certain kind of radical, as an adjective, universalism to De Rosier's students that obviously is being filtered through other kinds of English thinkers, European thinkers at the time, especially English thinkers. And in that sense, Bentham, not outside of the Indian context, but the Bentham that Eric Stokes tells us ultimately was used to authoritarian ends in India. We can go back to that. The Bentham that I know from my British Maoist friends, who are interested in Bentham, because Bentham for them, I'm thinking of my friends Phil Corrigan, Irish, British Marxist, my second book dedicated to him, and Derek Sayre and those sociologists. And they pick up Bentham as not what Bentham actually saying, so what is he articulating? What is the moment in time in history that the idea of utility and the idea of the use of law and taxation and education, the three, as a sort of tools of the state are being articulated. So in some ways, all these radicals and their friends are engaging with the British Empire and with the colonial state as subjects of that state, willing, unwilling, and creating a possibility of people, of a certain kind of sovereignty, which is very important to historians, and it's very important to taking in some ways, taking the young radicals out of both the sort of story of the unfolding of the nation state, also taking them out of the Ram Mohan onwards, right, modernity, Renaissance sort of paradigm, and actually creating maybe something much more uncertain and worth thinking over, creating political space. If a book, by going over supposedly a familiar and much well-trodden subject that has been, as Upal and others and Sumit have already pointed out, had been kind of jettisoned and sort of passed over, to bring it back into focus and creating the possibility of this new way of thinking about it, to me that would be the greatest compliment that I can give to my friend Rosinka, that she has been able to open this up in a new way. And then I'm going to just end with Radhanath Shikdar, that relationship between a new kind of political imaginary, which is an imperial map of a British possession, but also kind of how someone is a foot soldier and maybe a reluctant conscript in that project, and how it really echoes the question, right? It echoes the question, what should they know of us? Who are we? And how do we belong to empire? And who's all this for? If it's something, anything else than extraction of labor, anything else than the selling of goods and the buying of goods under the regime of a chartered imperial corporation, the residuum of that political space is the state that inevitably has to be cathected to the nation, and that state and the political thinking that came out of that engagement is something that is not only important for the history of Bengal, not only important for the history of India, not only important for the history of empire, but important for in some ways a global moment in political reckoning.
That was indeed an enriching discussion. Now, with the Roundtable's permission, we invite your questions, and given the short time limit, we request you that the questions should be brief, precise, and related to today's discussion.
Is the mic?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to interact because I am an assistant professor in a nearby college, Gokhale Memorial Girls College, and I am rooted in the field of literature and literary studies, which is why I call this an incredible opportunity to interact with people from different academic fields. Now, first, I would like to begin with a disclaimer. I have not yet read your book, Madam, India's First Radicals. However, I had the privilege of reading your book, Freedom and Beefsteaks, primarily because I was working on literature of return. That's a field that I'm seeking to establish, where Indian returned migrants are traveling across the country and writing about India, where I'm also seeking to bring to light the underread writers because of another process of canon formation that have previously happened. One is the nationalist writings, primarily the focus limelight being shed on nationalist writings who are writing about India, and therefore their versions of India and their radicalness has been brought out to the fore, and the other that Timothy Brennan speaks about the radicalization of diaspora writers, with Rushdie coming to fame with his awards. Now, I came across the idea, as I have been reading in your writing, that Derozio is writing about India primarily in creating metaphors. And that is somewhat a similarity that we also find in reference to the canonized literature written about India, which Iyengar, Hans Harder has also written about. Therefore, my question is, having read so much archives on India about writers writing about India, how would you look at their texts? Primarily writings about India through exploration of India through the perspective of a metaphor or a lived reality, because this is primarily a very local context that you are bringing to fore when you're speaking of India's first radicals located in a very non-homogeneous, as Sumit Shortcut 2 points out when he's speaking of the colonial middle class in modern India. But how would you read these writings, as metaphorical or aspects of lived realities of India at that point of a time? And how would you distinguish the two? Because Derozio in Fakir of Jalmira and definitely in Harp of India is speaking of India primarily through metaphors. Thank you.
And let's select a couple of them.
Our post
Thank
you for the book. So I had a small question. So can you tell us a little bit about the painting that is behind?
Yes, thank you for
because it's interesting that how a movement is visualized during that period, opening up into art history and visual history. Did you come across any other material like this in the archive, which sort of articulates this conjunctural point? And related to that, I thought the maps thing was very interesting. Yeah, and the second question is a cheeky question: will this book be out in Bangla? Because you talk about bilinguality.
Since the microphone is already here, sorry. So, a quick question. I haven't finished your book yet. I'm kind of halfway through, so please let me know if I'm wrong. But I'm just curious about, like, I have a friend who was working just a couple of months back on the finances of the abolitionist movement. So I'm, like, as a person who is interested in social networks theories and all of that, I'm just kind of curious about all these publications coming out from Young Bengal Network. So did you get to see anything about their finances, how they were managing that, how they were raising money and so on? So that's something I'm just curious about.
Yeah, so I haven't had the opportunity of reading the book as yet. I just collected it.
I was just going through a few pages, but I have a question. Since I'm interested in 18th century British theatre, I was also wondering if there is any connection between Young Bengal and contemporary 19th century theatre, either English or bilingual theatre.
There's one last question there, gentleman.
My question is related to Professor Chaudhuri. I have not yet located an illegal PDF as of yet of your book, but I have read the reviews and I have followed a few online discussions that you have had at Oxford, for example. You talk about a conception of a very nascent public sphere in your book, right? The idea that contestations of Young Bengal which is one set of actors in your book, that is the orthodox, if it can be called orthodox, borrowing from Upal Chaudhuri or Rosinka Sen, for example. They contest this idea that there is one singular monolith of orthodox, upper class, upper caste Bengali elite at that point. I was also wondering, since the Young Bengal kind of, Ridozo in particular, kind of abrogates unto himself the conception of the people, and speaking for the nation as a whole, speaking for obviously a nation in formation at that point, but the nation as a whole, was there any sort of detraction, resistance, or even appreciation by other sections, not the elite intelligentsia Hindu Bollywood, but maybe by some other lower class actors who were missing, who I think are missing from your book? Forgive me if I have not read the book as of yet. Do you speak about that set of particular actors who contribute to this notion of a public sphere in that 1820s to 40s Bengal?
I think we should take this.
Yes.
Otherwise, I won't remember the question.
No, okay.
So I'll try and remember them in the order in which they were asked. You asked about metaphor or lived reality. The metaphorical, as you're rightly pointing out, is used by Derozio in his poetry. You've read the poems, I can see. So certainly when he writes a poem like Half of India, and that's a metaphor for the state of the nation, there's no question. Poetry has its own formal demands, and one of the things that makes poetry is, of course, the use of metaphor. These people are very good writers of English, but I will say that they are actually more in the tradition of what you're calling lived reality. One could say reportage, but definitely with a very literary bent of mind. They may not be using metaphors in the way a poet might use a metaphor, but in the vividness of the description of Pyare Chand Mitra, for instance, when he's describing the peasant who has been thrown out of his hut, there is no metaphor there, but it is a very literary sort of writing. So that Dakshinarajan Mukhopadhyay's description of an Englishman presiding over a civil court is one of the most vivid descriptions that I have ever encountered. In fact, when my husband, who's a writer, read that passage when he was reading the manuscript, he said, "You should say this is like Dickens." And I said, "I won't actually draw the sort of parallel with Dickens. I won't mention Dickens. But yes, it is a novelistic eye almost that is describing this young English lad, half asleep, unable to understand the translations that are being proffered to him by a translator, the crowded court, the dog at his feet." I mean, it's an astonishing description of how badly these kacheris were run in the districts at the time by these English appointed magistrates. So, sorry, that's a long answer to a question. It could have been a shorter answer, which is that no, not so much use of metaphor, more lived reality and reportage and a descriptive prose on whatever they were writing about. Judiciary in the case of Dakshinarajan and the peasantry in the case of Pyare Chand Mitra. Thank you for that question. You noticed the image. I'm so glad, because I was going to request Sumit that if nobody asked, and I wasn't expecting anybody to ask, I wanted to draw your attention as Hindu college students to this Hindu college student. This is a student of the Hindu college, painted by Emily Eden. I'm quite sure the date was 1843, but when I got the permission from Victoria Memorial, where this image is kept, they couldn't find the date 1843. So I don't know why I made that connection. I think it was, certainly Emily Eden is here in 1843. Those are the years Emily Eden is here. But it is a painting of a Hindu college, a much younger student than my protagonist. I was almost not going to use it as a result. I had a conversation with my editor at Penguin and I said, but the men I am discussing are older by a decade at least. This is a very young boy. I don't want to give the wrong impression that the book is about, children, really a very young boy. I want to, indicate that they are men of action rather than young boys attending college. But we couldn't find anything else that was as striking and as beautiful as this image. So he said his entire department at Penguin are refusing to let go of this image and if I can please just let it be. So I let it be because I was also very much enamored of this image. But this is how they dress. This was important for me also to see that this is how the Hindu college student dressed at that time, which is absolutely in the Persian mode of dress. Ramoon dresses like this, except of course the cap is replaced for Ramoon with a turban. But it's that same angarkha and the churidar. It's the official formal Persian mode of dressing. So this I found very interesting. That all these radicals supposed to be anglicized. You made the point that that I made the point and Upal picked up on it that these are not the sort of anglicized Shakespeare quoting. Yes, I'm sure they quoted Shakespeare. They did in fact. It's there in the Bengal Spectator. But this is what they dressed like. This is their world in a sense. And in the last chapter, I deliberately put the scandal in the last chapter because they've been defined my scandal. I didn't want to put the scandal in up front, so I put the scandal in the last. So the last chapter begins with a very interesting elopement, and it then mentions the other. But one of the main reasons that they've been attacked in the Shambhat Prabhakar by Ishwar Gupta in 1830 is because they are not. A number of things, and there's a whole list of things, but because of their dress, because they're under this dress, apparently they wore they did not go barefoot. They wore European shoes. That European shoe you can't see here. Perhaps this student is wearing a European shoe, perhaps not. But why were they wearing European shoes? Why were they not wearing the uttariyo and the dhuti as any good Hindu should? Why were they urinating standing up? So one whole section is titled that because the Hindus don't do this sort of thing, it sounds so trivial now. Why do they cover their heads? Again, Hindus are not supposed to cover their heads. So it sounds trivial now, but at that time, Orthodox society is outraged, disappearing in the Shambhat Prabhakar. So anyway, that's the history of the image. Thank you for noticing that it's a beautiful painting by Emily Eden. Did you have anything else apart from the painting? No. Your neighbor. You asked about what? Remind me, finances.
Abolition.
Very, very interesting question about finances. Again, there's a general vague idea, they're all so wealthy, they have, their own money. Some of them are. Not all of them are as poor as Radhanath Chita, thinking about his next meal at home. Dokinaranjan Mukherjee, for instance, is his father is a son-in-law of Shruti Kumar Thakur. So he is from the Patriarcha Thakur body. So he is one person who is certainly wealthy and upper class, Mukhopadhyay, Brahmin and upper caste. But the other wealthy person in the group is Roshik Mullik, Roshik Krishna Mullik, who comes from a very wealthy family of traders, commercial traders, but of the Tili Boisho caste. Again, I found this out, and I've put a footnote there about how they would not have been allowed any position of importance in medieval Bengali society, for instance. So, from one of the lower caste groups, but financial. So, they did contribute. Yes, Dokinaranjan, Roshi Krishna, they gave their own money. Ram Gopal Ghosh became a very, very successful entrepreneur. So, he made his own money. He came from he was a shopkeeper's son. David Hare gave him a scholarship, that's why he was able to study here. But he made his own money. So again, because he made a lot of money also at that time, he set up his own agency house. He also gave his own money towards the newspapers, the things that you're saying, the other very interesting method of raising money, which they took, I think, from the foundation of Hindu College itself, and that I've written about for their volume that Shukurna and Upal have edited, is from what we today call crowdfunding, but in that time was called subscriptions. So they sent out, so there were subscribers. The SAGK had a long list of subscribers, and it's an astonishing list of subscribers from Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar at the age of 21 to Darukanath Tagore at the age of 40, whatever he was, 3 or whatever he was at that time. So it's an astonishing range of people who are members. They're all paying a subscription. So in a sense, that is how they're funding the SAGK. That is how they're funding the political activities. Yeah. The SAGK volume, that I think you may find online. Yes, because the selections were published 3 times. Yes, those in fact you will find online. Those are digitized. Thankfully, somebody has digitized them. But the list of members is there. Yeah, all 3 volumes are prefaced by a list of the members for that year. So yeah, that answers your question about the finances. You asked... Yes, theatre. Krishna Mohan Bandyopadhyay wrote the first Indian play in English, The Persecuted, which is coming out in 1831. So, absolutely. So, he is the first Indian writer to write a play in English, and it is entirely based on his own life. So, it's extremely interesting to read as well. I think it's his own character that's the protagonist in the play. And it is the stance he took with his own father as well, who desperately asked him to do prashchitta, to simply, all they needed to do in those days to be absolved of their sins, as you know, is pay the brahmin. And he refused to do that. So he was thrown out of his house because his friends threw beef bones as well into a neighboring brahmin's house. Yes. So to answer your question, Krishna Mohan Bandyopadhyay is the only playwright in the group, but they are also the first group to be the object of attack, in fact by someone who far better fits the definition of Young Bengal. Michael Madhusudhan Dutta's Eke Bala Shubhuta is based on them. Which is why it was not, in fact, then allowed to be performed at Belgachia, because one of the Young Bengal group, I think, got to the Belgachia Rajas and said, okay, enough is enough. So it's there in print, but I don't think it was performed at the time. But they are also the Young Bengal. And last, but not the least, certainly. Okay, remind me again, what was the question?
Were there opposition, resistance, etc. from another section of the people that the Young Bengal evoked, other than the upper caste?
Yes, you raised a very important question that I had anticipated would be raised by traditional historians. I have therefore defended myself against it as well as I can. I'm sure not very well, since I'm not a historian. I made it abundantly clear in the chapter that I call the people of India, because I'm arguing that they are in fact the first people to put this phrase into circulation, the people of India, in the English language, the people of India. Because my argument has been, and it has been an argument that I have been making from my first book onward, that, and here I make it emphatically in relation to your question, the people, that the people need to be imagined into existence first. Apart from Benedict Anderson's famous formulation of imagined community, I'm not focusing so much on community as on imagined, because it is something that needs to happen in culture first, and only then does it happen in politics, I think everywhere in the world, and certainly here. So when I say the people, that they are the first to actually put this phrase into circulation, this is what I mean, that it is in cultural practice that the phrase is being put into circulation by this group. Now, are the people of India, as we understand them, the lower classes, the labourers, the peasant, are they actors in the book? No, it is. I have not been able to retrieve their voices from the archive in the way that I have been able to at least retrieve these. Although they've been lying neglected, it is possible to retrieve them. The voice of the peasant is, as you know, again, all of you are students who have read your subaltern historians, who have read your Ranajit Guho, you know that, for instance, in the discussion of this Chautal Hul, what is being retrieved there in the from the colonial archive, but in the Chautal's, conception of the Thakur telling him to engage in war with the British, is a peasant consciousness. That is not my job here. I do not have the self-confidence of these all-male, pantheon of. Yeah, Latamani is absolutely. There are no. I'm just sort of being extreme in what I'm saying, but you understand what I'm saying. That is not my job here. I am unable to do that. I'm not doing that. The gender as well. Somebody pointed out from that side of the room that I mentioned Rani Rashmani, but I couldn't. I mean, I thought about it because anybody who is working nowadays will immediately think gender, caste. These are issues at the forefront of everybody's mind. And as you say, the laboring classes, the workers, the peasants. These are the limitations with which I have to work. I have had to work. I've made that clear in the introduction. I could not retrieve that voice. What I could retrieve was the middle class voice that argued on their behalf. And when this middle class voice is speaking, for instance, when Dakshinaranjan is speaking, when he's making a speech, he is thinking of themselves as the people of India. When he's saying, nothing will happen until the people, we make it happen. But he's also speaking of the people out there who are the people of the soil whose condition needs to be improved. So the people exists in this self-divided category in the imagination at this time. As we the people of these middle-class men who are arguing, and also those the people you're asking me about, the laborer and the peasant, who, unfortunately, as Marx said, and that quotation by Marx is used in the epigraph of Edward Said's Orientalism, they cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.